Hi, I'm Jenny Rushmore of Cashmerette, and today I'm going to be taking you through how to sew the Fairfax jacket from my book, Sewing the Curve. And in fact, the Fairfax jacket is what I'm wearing on the very cover here. So if you've always dreamed of a quilted coat that actually fits curves, and maybe you're a beginner sewer and you're not quite sure how you would do it, you have come to the right place. So let's get started. So I want to begin by just taking a look at the two different views of the Fairfax. Now, it's a little bit deceptive, but this jacket is actually very, very easy to make. It's fundamentally a very simple construction, but there are some techniques that basically elevate it to make it something special. So this is view A, which is the slightly longer hip length version. As you can see, it has these bias bound edges that I'm going to take you through how to do. This is a really core skill when you're learning how to sew. Over time, you'll get more and more neat at it, but this is a great place to practice. There are bust darts for shaping. This is unusual in quilted jackets, but because we design for people with C to H cut busts, it's really important for us. There are these fun patch pockets on view A, but you can keep them on, leave them off, that's up to you. The back is just a fairly plain back, and so it gives you this really nice semi-fitted look. Now there's also view B. Now view B is actually the one I'm wearing on the cover, and I will tell you, I have worn this jacket a lot. So here is view B. It is shorter, so it's more of a cropped length, although you can make the pattern any length you want, but this is the length it's designed for. And in this case, we also have this nice tie, which just simply tie it together and kind of holds it together on your body. Otherwise, it's exactly the same, it just doesn't have the pockets. When you're learning to sew the Fairfax jacket, you're going to learn a few key skills. The first one is how to create your own quilted fabric. You don't have to, we'll get onto that in a moment, but if you want to, you can. And creatively, the sky is the limit. You're going to learn how to sew darts, how to sew visible bias binding, how to do patch pockets, and also how to sew sleeves in using the set-in method. Now, before you get started, you need to pick your size. So the first step is to measure yourself. And in Sewing the Curve, I have a comprehensive guide on how to do that. If you don't have the book yet, don't worry, go to cashmerette.com/sizing and we have a guide there. The other thing we have there is the secret sauce of Cashmerette, which is our Cashmerette sizing calculator. Over there, you can simply input your high bust measurement, full bust, bra size, waist measurement, and hip, and we will tell you what size to make. One of the good things about the Fairfax jacket is it's a reasonably loosely fitting, reasonably boxy, and what that means is there's a lot of flexibility there. So I would say pick the right size for your upper body. If it turns out that your waist and hip are a size or two bigger, don't even worry about it. You can make the same size as your upper body. Conversely, say your hips are like a size smaller than the jacket, don't worry about it. It won't make a huge difference to the overall fit. So I'd say pick your size by your upper body and you're very likely to have a good result. So now let's talk fabric. So one of the most fun things about the Fairfax jacket is that it is really, really, really suitable for many different types of fabric. So if you are making your own fabric, basically any light to mid-weight woven. So here are just a few I pulled out my stash. So here is a fun cotton lawn in a crazy strawberry print. I think that would make an amazing jacket. Here is a viscose with a little bit of a texture that I bought recently. I think this would be really sophisticated and pretty. You could even go with something more like a flannel. Really, the world is your oyster when it comes to the fabrics for this. Now remember, if you're making your own pre-quilted, there'll be an outside layer of fabric and an inside layer of fabric. So, like the lining, you can use the same fabric for both, or you can use different fabrics. So if you want to have a fun surprise lining, you can do that. And here is another really fun sample from the book where we did just that. So we used a cotton lawn on the outside in this really fun kind of abstract houses print, and then a complementary shot cotton on the inside. And I just love that kind of like peak of color. So if you're creating your own quilted fabric, you'll also need the layer in the middle. So that's called batting, or sometimes called wadding. And basically it's this kind of what you associate with like quilt fabric, what would be in the middle of a quilt. So you want something that's somewhere between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch thick. Typically they're made out of cotton or polyester. And you just want to make sure, I would say like it's a kind of nice spot in the middle. You don't want something super spongy. You don't want something super flat, but this kind of degree is the area that you're kind of looking for. So don't worry too much about it. Like most things will be fine, but I'd say around 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch thick. So that's if you're making your own fabric, but there is a cheat code for this, which is you can now buy pre-quilted fabric. So you may recognize this from my jacket, and I have saved the rest of it, partly because I love it, partly because it's very expensive, and maybe I can use it for something for my 4-year-old. But this is pre-quilted fabric that you can just buy by the yard. So this is a Japanese one by a designer called Nani Iro, but you can actually buy it widely all around the world. And it's made out of double gauze, which is a kind of cotton. On one side it has a print, and on the other side it just has a plain muslin fabric, but it is finished. Now this is one thing to bear in mind. If you use pre-quilted fabrics, there are some that aren't finished on the back, and that won't work for this jacket. So you need one that has also got fabric on the back if you're going to be doing it. When you get them, they often have this kind of edging down the side, which is holding the edges together. What I will say is when you cut it, the ends will come apart and you will actually be able to see the layers. So you can see the layers here. So as we're sewing, if you are using pre-quilted, I'll show you how to address those edges, but it's fine. So using pre-quilted is a great way to make a Fairfax very, very fast. You also get, like the perfect quilting lines. You don't need to worry about that. And you can get some really pretty options. However, it's not that common. So I would say like it's increasingly common. There are these Japanese ones that have been popping up around the place. In the US, I know that like Joann Fabrics have some options. So if you can find one, it's really great. But if you can't, no worries. You're just going to make your own fabric, and actually the creativity will be even more. Now, beyond fabric, you also need notions. So the first thing, and you're going to need a lot of it, is bias tape. So bias tape is what goes around all of those edges and finishes off every edge pretty much of the jacket. So you can buy it or you can make it. If you buy it, and this is the bought type, it will be called 1/2 inch wide double fold bias tape. And the reason it's called double fold is because when you open it up, this is considered the first fold, even though there's 2 of them. I know that's confusing. This is the first fold and this is the second fold. So when it says 1/2 inch, what it means is when it's closed like this, it's 1/2 an inch wide. But when it is open, it is 2 inches wide. So don't be too confused by that, okay? So it's called 1/2 inch because it's 1/2 inch when it's closed. So you can buy pre-made bias tape in a variety of colors, and it's certainly very convenient to do that. You're going to need almost 8 yards, so a lot of it. However, you are a bit restricted if you only go buy the colors in a store. So you can also make your own. Check out the video at the link below if you want to learn more about how to make your own bias tape. Now, other notions you're going to need a needle and a thread for your machine, a safety pin and chalk marker if you're making your own quilted fabric. So you need a whole bunch of safety pins, sorry, not a safety pin, a whole bunch of safety pins, and a chalk marker. So we recommend this type. It's manufactured by Clover, and it's also called like a Chaco liner. And what's really nice about it is that it basically has a tiny little metal wheel at the end, and it gives you, I can do it on my finger, a very, very, very clean straight line that you know is going to come off. So those are great. You can also use a disappearing fabric marker. The only thing to bear in mind with those is that occasionally they don't wash off, and that's a bit of a nightmare. So if you're going to use any kind of marker, I recommend testing it first to make sure it comes out. Also test making it cold. It is known that some disappearing markers will disappear with water, but when they're cold, it comes back. So you want to check that. You also want to have a tailor's ham, which is a pressing tool like this, but you can also use a rolled up towel, and this is going to help us press things around the edges. Now, if you are making your own quilted fabric, there's also another couple of tools that can make it even easier. So one is to use dissolvable double-sided tape. So this is also known as Wonder Tape, and basically it's a special double-sided sticky tape that you can sew straight through and then dissolves when it's gone through the wash. So it's great for holding things in place, and it's also great for bias tape if you're just learning how to do it. It can help it be more secure. You can also use fabric glue. The other thing that really helps is if you have what's known as a walking foot for your machine. So without going into too much details, the way that a traditional machine moves fabric through the machine is by pulling it from the bottom. And what that means is when there's 2 layers or even 3, like when you're quilting, it can result in the layers being pulled unequally through the machine, and then they shift over time. What a walking foot does is, as well as having these little things that pull your fabric through on the bottom, it adds them on the top. So it does this, and it helps your fabric feed through your machine more cleanly. So if you have a walking foot on your machine, good idea to use it when you're quilting fabric. If you don't, it's fine. So let's take a look at the pattern pieces. So the Fairfax is actually super simple. It only has 4 pattern pieces. So you have your front, and they come in different cup sizes. So just make sure you pick your right one. It's got a dart here, and there is a pocket marking, although you can place the pocket wherever you want. This is where we recommend, but you can put it any way you feel like. There is a line here to cut for view B if you want the view B length, but you can also lengthen and shorten it if you want. So the length and shorten line is here. So you simply cut across and then spread or overlap as much as you want to add or take away, which you can learn more about in Sewing the Curve in the section where we talk about lengthening and shortening. So that's the front. Then we have the back piece, which is a fairly standard back piece. We have the sleeve, again, kind of looks like a normal sleeve. And then the patch pocket piece, and that's it. Now, if you are cutting them from pre-quilted fabric, then you just need 2 fronts, a back, 2 sleeves, and 2 pockets. Done. If you are cutting them, you are making your own fabric, you need 3 of everything. So you need 3 front left, 3 front right. So that means 3 sets of fronts, okay? So an outside set, a batting set, and then a lining set. And you need the same for all of it. So for the back, you're going to cut 3 different backs. The outside fabric, the middle batting, and the lining fabric. Same for the sleeves, same for the pockets. So it's a bit more cutting, and then you are going to make your fabric. So in order to get your pattern ready, you have a couple of different options. So if you purchased the paper book, you are actually able to get the paper patterns out of the back of the book. So you simply open them up, and they're in the box here. And when you open them up, they are printed on both sides of the paper, and there are some overlaps. So what you can do is come down here, and it tells you which pages and what color to look for. And then use tracing paper to trace out your pattern pieces. If you'd rather, and in some ways it's easier, you can also use digital patterns. So there is a digital version of all these patterns available. Go to the back of the book in the back inside pocket here, and it gives you the information about how to get those files. They're available to print at home or to send to a copy shop and print as an A0 file. Again, in the book, I go in detail through how to download them, how to use them, and how to get them printed. So I'm going to start by showing you how to quilt your own fabric. So in this case, I'm going to use a sample. So I've got this kind of aqua cotton is going to be the top layer. Then I have my batting, and then I have this fun raspberry linen, which is going to be the inside. So the first thing that I need to do is cut those pieces. Now, they're actually already cut, so you'll see when you cut them, you want to cut rectangles around the size of your front of your piece that you're doing. So I'm going to just show you on this piece, but you're going to do it on all of the pieces. And in this case, that's, more or less a rectangle. So you then want to make a sandwich, and this is basically going to be exactly how you wear the fabric. So you are going to have your lining fabric down first as the bottom of the sandwich. Now, this one happens to be the same color on both sides. But if it wasn't, you'd have the right side down towards the table, okay? So this is the right side, the wrong side is facing up. Then we're gonna put the next layer of our sandwich down, which is the batting. So because we have made these pattern pieces, these fabric pieces a little bit bigger than our pattern piece, you don't have to worry about it being 100% exact here. As long as it's roughly in the same place, that's fine. And then you put what's going to be the outside of your jacket, which we call the shell, on the very top with the right side facing up. So there we go. Now you're going to smooth it down, smooth. Now, you might be thinking, why are we doing this? This is a little bit different. Why didn't we just cut pieces like this? Well, the reason is when you quilt your own fabric, it has a tendency to shrink. So if we cut here and then we quilted, you might find the edge is now here and it wouldn't fit you anymore. So this is by far the best way to do it to make sure that you're still going to get your whole pattern piece out at the end. So you want to do this piece by piece. So you don't want to quilt the whole piece of fabric for the whole jacket. You want to do it piece by piece. So I make all the layers flat, and then I'm going to get safety pins, and I am going to safety pin all the layers together. So you can get special quilting pins if you have those. Great. I will tell you right now, I am not a quilter. So if you are an expert quilter and you look at what I'm doing and you think, oh no, Jenny, there's better ways of doing it than that, I apologize in advance. Maybe there are, but I'll show you a way that works. It works for me. It's been fine. I promise it'll be all right if you do it this way. And as if by movie magic, it's all pinned. Okay, so now we have this pinned and it's reasonably secure. So the next thing you're going to do is mark on the quilting lines that you want to use. So the world is your oyster again here. If you are a big quilter, you can do whatever you like. You could do all kinds of funny patterns. But what I would recommend if you are new to this is to do some simple horizontal lines, which is how we did 2 of the samples that you'll see in the book. So to do that, you want to start in the middle. And you do need to make sure that you're parallel to the grain lines because you're going to be cutting the fabric on the grain line eventually. So I'm going to just use a chalk marker and a quilting ruler and just go straight down the middle here. Can you see that? Might not be that clear. All right, let me try a different color and see if it helps. Hold on. So my recommendation is to do quilting lines 3 inches apart. And using a quilting ruler like this actually makes it really easy to see those. Oh yes, that's much easier. Okay, I'm just going to remark this one so that you guys can see it. So 3 inches apart gives you the classic quilted jacket look. And also means you're not going to be spending 100 million years doing the sewing of it. So let's get over there. So as you can see with the quilting ruler, it's nice because you can see through and you can check that your line is even all the way down. But really you can do anything here. You could do diagonal lines, you could do wavy lines, you could hand quilt it if you want to. Some people enjoy doing that. Takes all sorts. I'm going to just spin it round because I'm right-handed. I'm going to continue here. And as I mentioned in the intro, just be really careful that your whatever you're marking it with, in this case the chalk liner, comes off the fabric because you really don't want to end up with lines on your final jacket. Okay? There's going to be 2 more in here. Okay. So this piece is now marked, and what we're going to do next is we're going to sew it. So begin by sewing in the middle, okay? So you want to sew this one first, and then start going out. So do this one, then go one side, then the other, then the other, then the other, then the other, then the other. You get the idea. So start in the middle and then go alternate sides. And basically what we're just trying to do is keep the quilting even. It's a little bit of a challenge getting really even quilting, and it's definitely something that you tend to improve on as you do it more. But don't worry too much about it. There's a certain also kind of look and charm to quilted jackets if they're not like precisely perfect. What you are trying to avoid is like folds in the fabric. So you don't want anything like that. You need the stitching to be flat and the fabric to be flat. But apart from that, don't worry, it's going to like puff up a little bit. That's kind of just the look of quilting. So let's go over to the sewing machine. So I'm gonna sew the first line of quilting. As I mentioned before, if you have a walking foot, you should use it. This is a basic beginner machine, doesn't have one. Also, if you use a machine from FAF, they have what's called IDT, which is a built-in walking foot, which you should enable. But in this case, I'm just using a normal machine. I'm going to use a 4-length stitch because we want a longer stitch, and I'm just going to start at the edge here. Now, if you don't touch a safety pin, no problem, you can just go past it. But I'm about to hit this one, so in that case, you want to take it out. Now, as you can see, because I don't have a walking foot, it's starting to drag the top level a little bit. So you want to try and kind of hold it yourself to keep it more or less even. I'm going to take the other safety pin out. Okay, so there is my first line. Now I'm just going to go backwards and forwards and finish the quilting. Okay, so the stitching is all done here. So another couple of tips. You don't need to back stitch at either end when you're doing this prep, so you can save a little time then. And also you want to consistently go from the same end. So you're alternating away from the center, but you always want to go in the same direction like this. And what that means when you're going through the machine is you might sometimes have to roll up the fabric a little bit to allow you to do that, but that should work. So now we have this piece, we're ready to cut out our pattern piece. So I'm going to lay my pattern piece on top of the fabric, and you still need to make sure that you are lining it up appropriately. So here is the grain line. And I want to make sure that the quilting lines are perpendicular to the grain line, because these I already did perpendicular to the grain line. So we're just going kind of in circles, but it works. So I'm just going to lay my piece on. I need to shuffle it down a bit to make sure it's on the fabric there. Okay, now I'm going to use a rotary cutter. So to do that, I'm going to just weigh my pattern piece down with some what are these called? With some washers. Oh, need a little bit of help there. But you can also use scissors. I like doing this. I find it like an efficient way to cut, but it's totally up to you. So I am now going to cut all the way around with my rotary cutter. So pull it down, expose the blade, and go around. Readjust it, it's sliding away. Okay, so I'm just gonna do a few little bits where it didn't cut off. Okay, so a few things at this point. So we need to mark our notches. Normally you cut into the fabric, but I don't recommend that with this layered sandwich. So instead I'm going to use my chalk liner, and I'm just going to chalk it on instead. Then tie placement over here and here. And then the other thing in this case I need to do is I need to mark the dart. So this is the way that I mark darts. So I want to mark it on the wrong side, which is the pink side. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a mark where the dart leg is on the wrong side. And on this one, I'm just popping them over. Then I'm going to put a pin through the dart apex through all the layers. And then I'm going to carefully flip it over without the pin falling out. So my pin is here. You may or may not be able to see it, but I can see it. And then I'm simply going to take a ruler and join up the darts. I'm doing it extra hard so that you can see it. You don't need to go over it so many times as I am. So there is the dart. So turn it back over. Now, the other thing in this case that you can do is mark where the pocket's going. So you can mark all the way around, but you actually don't need to because you really only need to know where the top points are. So again, I'm going to take a pin, I'm going to put it through. And in this case, I'm marking it on the right side because that's where the pocket's going to be attached. So I'm just going to put the pin through, turn it over, and I'm just going to make a little cross mark where that pin is, so I know for the future. And then here, same thing, I'm going to tip it over. And there are lots of different ways you can do it, but I am just sharing with you the way Jenny Rushmore, do it. Okay, so 2 final things. So we have our lovely pattern piece here. Now, it's up to you, but if you want, you can now sew around the edge of the pattern piece about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch away around, just to secure all the pieces down. It will make it slightly easier. Honestly, you don't have to, but it will make it slightly easier. And particularly if you do a design where there's big gaps at the edges, it can help you to secure them down firmly. The other thing to consider with the front specifically is you're going to be doing another front, and really you want them to be symmetrical. And to be symmetrical, you want these lines of quilting to be going straight across the body. So you are now going to repeat the entire process and make another pattern piece. But when you do, you want to make sure that you are lining it up on the fabric so that the line is going to go at exactly the same height. So literally you just place this on top of your quilted fabric, your new piece, line up the lines of the quilting with the new piece, and then line up your pattern piece, and you can be absolutely sure, okay, the line is going to go across all of them. So if you're making your own quilted pattern pieces, now you can get to work. You need 2 fronts, you need a back, you need 2 sleeves, and you need 2 pockets. Otherwise, if you're using pre-quilted fabric, you can just go ahead and cut them out. And then we can start making our jacket. Okay, so I am going to now demonstrate how to make the Fairfax jacket using this pre-quilted fabric. So whether you made your own or you're using pre-quilted, the steps will be exactly the same. This one is helpful for you to see because the flowers are the right side and the blue is the wrong side. So here is a front. So the first thing we're going to do is sew the front darts. So if I turn it over to the wrong side, you can see that I marked my dart in chalk here. Now, what I've also done is I marked a line through the center of the dart and then I sewed it. Now, the reason we do that, in this fabric, it's not so important because the quilting lines are very, very close to each other. But if you have fabric and the quilting lines are far apart, you really are just doing this to kind of secure the dart a little bit more for when you fold it, because otherwise you'll get all these layers, they can shift out of place very easily. So this helps keep it where you need it to be. It also actually helps you figure out where to fold it. So we are just going to sew this dart in the normal way. So I'm going to do this, I'm going to fold it in half, and look at that, the sewing actually kind of enables it to go in half, or helps it go in half. I'm going to bring my pins over. So I'm going to match up the dart legs. I'm going to put one through and then see if it was in the right place on the other side. And look at that, it actually was. I'm then going to add another one at the end of the dart apex. And then I'm just going to put a few more in. I'm going to check. Yep, that's on the line. And if it wasn't, I would go back and alter it until it was. Okay, there we go. So now it's over to the sewing machine. So I've come over to the sewing machine and we start at the outer edge. I'm going to bring my needle down on the line, take this pin out, and just a regular 2.5 inch stitch. Back stitch. I'm going to get these threads out and then go down. And when you get towards the end, there are different ways that you can finish off a dart. The easiest way is what I'm going to show you. You sew straight off the end, like that. Pull the fabric off. Then you get these 2 threads that are coming off, and you simply tie them. I'm tying once, tying twice, oops, 3 times, and then trim there. Okay, so I've sewed the start, so now I need to press it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just press it flat. This is something you always want to do. It helps set the stitches by flattening them into the fabric. And then I'm going to press over a ham. So you want to do this because this is a curved area, particularly towards the end, and you basically can use the ham to maintain that curve. So bringing it over the ham, and then I'm going to fold the dart down and make sure the end is nice and round round the ham there. So now I'm going to press again. And then one more time from the right side. Now, if you have delicate fabric, you definitely want to use a press cloth. This is just a sample and it's not very delicate, so I don't need to do it. Now, obviously this is quilted fabric, so it is a lot thicker than you are probably used to sewing a dart in, if you have sewed a dart before. So don't worry too much. The process is almost exactly the same. You're just going to end up with this almost like sculpted piece of fabric, right? Like it kind of holds itself almost. I will say, if you are using particularly thick fabric, there is one other thing you can do, and that is you can now cut this triangle off. So if you do that, you need to leave, I'd say a solid like 1/4 of an inch of seam allowance there. Then you need to finish the seam allowance. Now bear in mind, this will be visible on the inside of your jacket. So I'd say in the ideal world, you don't want to do it. But if you find that this is just too thick, because maybe you've used thicker batting, that is an option for you. So we've done that one front, we put the dart in. Now you want to repeat the same with the second side. So now we are going to move on to doing the patch pockets for view A. So you'll have 2 pockets that look like this. Again, the flowers are the right side and the blue is the wrong side for us. And we're going to do our first piece of visible bias binding. So this is actually a nice first one to do because it lets you kind of try something out on a small size. And also you're going to learn how to go around these curves at the bottom. If all else fails, it's really easy to do another one of these. So it's a really good way to practice. So I've cut a 26 inch long piece of bias binding. You can see it's double fold. So the edges are going in from the side and then it's got another fold like this. I'm going to place it roughly around my pocket like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up all the way on one side. So I'm going to open it all the way on one side and then this side keeps folded over. Now, at no point do you actually want to get rid of these folds. So we're trying to keep them. But as you open them up, like don't worry too much if that stays flipped over right now. It doesn't really make any difference. We just need to open this side. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to pin it onto the right side of the pocket. So I'm going like this. Now, the nice thing about these folds is they actually provide you the guidance for where you are going to sew. So we're actually going to sew down this fold. So down the first side is very easy. Now we're going around the corner. So this is where it gets a little bit trickier. So the nice thing about bias tape is that it goes around corners nicely. So I'm just keeping my fingers down there and I'm actually able to turn it around the corner fairly easily. I'm just going to keep it here. Now the inner part buckles and that's normal because of the way that the curve goes. So this part here is inevitably standing up, but that's fine. We just want to make sure that the part where the crease is, where we're going to sew later, is flat. Now, one thing you can do to make it further lie flat is to make a few little clips into the bias tape here. Now, if you do this, you really don't want to go too far because if you do, you will have holes at the corner. But what I'm doing is going a little bit in and it's just allowing that to spread out a little bit at the corner and get it really nice and flat. So now I'm going to continue along another straight edge. Come to another corner. So I'm just going to manipulate that to be flat. It's actually not as hard as you might imagine because of the bias in the bias tape. Okay, and again, I'm going to do a little bit of clipping. Just a little bit to help it go around the corner. So now I'm going to continue on up the other side. Now you can see we have plenty of bias tape either end. That is fine. We are allowing for a little bit of wiggle room, and it means that we will get it perfect. So there we have. Now it's pinned. So now what we're going to do is we're going to sew it on at this outer fold. So I'm going to start here, go down, round, making sure that this is as curved as I can and that we don't have any angles, up the other side, up to here. So over to the sewing machine, I'm going to start here where the bias tape overlaps fabric. Back, and then just follow the crease. Oh, should have taken that one out first. Okay, so I've sewed all the way around at that crease. And if for any reason you don't see that crease in your bias tape, it's 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So now what we're going to do is the clever thing where we start flipping bias over. So I'm going to go round to the wrong side first. And the first thing I'm going to suggest is to trim down the corners just a little bit on your quilted padded area, because it's going to make it a little bit easier to turn. So I'm just going to take that corner off there. And I'm not cutting through the bias tape, I'm only cutting through the quilt sandwich. And if for any reason you used like thicker than average batting, you can trim down these edges a little bit too if you want, but I generally find just turning the corners helps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the bias over. So I'm going to do that again. So it's up here. I'm going to just flip it, and it actually kind of wants to go over. Then I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to bring the bias tape over to the back side. So now when you bring it over, the edge of the bias tape should just cover that stitching line that you just made. So you can see here, it's just covering it. So on the long sides and the straight sides, it's actually very, very easy to do this. That worked like that. On the corners, it's a little bit trickier because naturally it kind of wants to do this. Now, what you'll see when you go to the other side is that you're trying to maintain this even edge around the whole pocket. So here on the sides, very easy. But at the corners, if you don't watch out, you end up with this. You end up where it's kind of disappearing. So what you have to do is you have to kind of work with it a little bit to make sure that it's even. And so you have to kind of just play around with your fingers a little bit, push it into the right place so that it's still curved and that it's covering up the stitching line on the inside. So there's a little bit of backwards and forwards here. So I'm going to turn it back over and I'm going to enclose and just start pressing down the long sides, which are the easy ones. Now, you have a choice here. You can pin it, or this is a great time to use Wonder Tape. So I'm going to open this up. I think this one's brand new actually. So I've opened the tape and I'm going to literally take a piece of this tape And you can see it here. It's just like a transparent web sticky tape. And basically I'm just going to put it inside here and I'm going to stick the bias down. Now you might think this is cheating, but my theory is that there is no such thing as cheating in sewing. You should see factories. They are using all kinds of little tricks and techniques. There's no reason you can't too. So the nice thing about this is it secures it really securely compared to pins, because there's no like sort of ups and downs. And also you can re-stick it and check it. So if that didn't work, I can still peel that off. Your machine can sew through it with no problem, and it will wash out when the garment is washed. Okay, so I'm going to do the bottom edge now. And just for the sake of speed, I'm going to do pins on this one. And if it doesn't perfectly cover the stitching line, you don't actually have to worry about it, because the stitching line is going to be deep inside a pocket. No one's ever going to see it. But it's the nice way of making sure it's even. So that's why you should care. So I'm leaving the corners for now, going all the way around here. And there are so many creative things you can do with these pockets. Like you could have like a plain color Fairfax and just have like pops of color in the pockets, or have a contrast. I just think there's so many fun opportunities. Okay, so we still got these open corners. So now what I'm going to do is manipulate them to be as close as possible to that stitching line. So I'm going to give it a little press, and then I'm going to flip it over and see, does it look even? And you know what? That is pretty good. That meets my standards. So I'm going to press it again from the right side. Great. And put a few pins in here. So as you press bias tape, you're actually kind of changing it, and you're basically molding it around corners, a bit like how you can mold wool. And so that's what we're doing here basically. So I'm going to do the same thing, line it up with the stitching. And even if that results in like a tiny bit of like a fold on the back side, it doesn't matter. As long as it isn't on the front side, as long as the front looks nice and smooth and isn't puckered, you're all good. There we go. So I'm just going to add a couple more pins here. So technically I'm adding the pins from the wrong side, but you're going to see in a minute that it doesn't really matter because the heads of the pins are in the right place. Okay, so this is all pinned. This has been wonder taped. So now what we're going to do is we're going to secure the binding down. Okay, so now we're going to secure the bias tape down. So what we want to do is we want to sew just a tiny amount into the bias tape here around the edge, really parallel to this seam. And we also need to make sure that we're catching the bias tape on the other side, because the whole idea is to enclose it fully. So the easiest way to do this, if your machine does this, is to place the fold of the fabric in the middle of the presser foot underneath where the needle is. And then if you have a machine that lets you move your needle left and right, use it to move the needle to the side. So that's the best way to do it. If you don't have a machine that does that, what you can do is line this fold up with another point on your presser foot. Now, you want to be really precise here. So I'm like, okay, if I did just at the edge of this lip here, I would also be very, very close. So you want to have something that you're using as a reference point, ideally. So I'm going to move my needle over, and then I'm just going to sew all the way around. As you go around the corners, you need to just go slowly and keep on turning the fabric. And then if necessary, you can keep the needle down, press a foot up and turn it a bit more. Okay, so we have now sewed this bias tape on. We checked that it is on both sides. You can obviously use coordinating thread rather than a contrasting one, which will make any little wobbles seem a little bit clearer, but, oh sorry, a little less clear, but I'm doing it in contrast to show you. So now we're going to trim the two ends off. Depending on the size you're making, you're going to find a different amount to trim off. Okay, and now we're going to do the bias binding of the top. So we're going to repeat the same set of things. So I've cut a piece 9 inches long, and I'm going to open it up. I'm going to open this side up all the way, and I'm going to pin it along the top here. So I'm extending past the binding on both ends and just going along here. You will occasionally meet junctions in the bias, like you can see here. It's probably ideal not to put them in such a prominent place, but you know what, it doesn't really matter, so I'm going to carry on with this piece. Okay, now I'm going to sew across the top the same as I did a minute ago. Okay, so I've sewn that piece on there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off the edges 1/4 inch out, and I want them to be parallel with the sides. And because this is a diagonal bias, it does actually mean that it won't be in a totally straight line in the way that you would think it would be. So I'm going to just go up. It doesn't have to be precise, but you just want it to go up. There we go. Okay, so I've trimmed off the ends. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold in these ends until they are flush with the end and press. I'm going to do the same over here. Okay, now I'm going to do the same folding over that we did when we were doing the bottom. Now, there's going to be a little adjustment at the end of this, so keep watching. So I'm flipping it up and away, turning it over. This side stays folded over, and then the whole thing folds over again. So I'm just going to iron this, or press it rather. Okay, so keeping it down. Now I'm going to look from the right side and say, okay, does that look even? Yes, it does. But what you're going to find is that these ends are not perfectly even, basically because of the diagonal angle. So I'm just going to pin down the top bit a little bit. Let's get rid of that bent pin. Okay. Okay, and now at the ends, you basically just want to fold it so that they disappear. So in this case, I'm just going to just play around with it until the end is flush. It really doesn't matter how you do it. So in this case, I'm going to fold it in there a little bit. Fold it over. You are never going to see the wrong side of this. So there we go. Can you see? I just did a little bit of folding, and now that is all flush. So I'm just going to press it and put a pin through that. And now at the other end, it's actually already not too bad. But again, I'm just going to fold in this corner a little bit. Okay, I'm going to actually unfold it a little bit and just fold it over, hold on, fold this over until it is even. So again, there we go. Okay, so now both the corners are looking neat. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the top stitching of the binding in exactly the same way we did it here, from here to here on the bias. Okay, so I'm going to go over here. I'm going to move my needle to the side because I can. And then I'm just going to make sure it has stayed under there. And there we go. Okay, so now we have a pocket. So we're going to get our front that we sewed previously and put the dart into. So you need to transfer the markings for where the pocket goes. To be honest, if you just transfer the two top markings, that will work. You don't need to transfer all the way around. You are not going to be able to see these, I don't think, in this picture, but that's okay, they're here. So basically, the upper bit of the slope goes towards the center front. So you will find that this will align. They are, obviously, it's a symmetrical pair. So if this one doesn't align, just use the other one. You're going to be doing two fronts, two pockets. I'm just doing one at a time. So now I'm going to pin this pocket, and you just need to pin it in enough places to keep it still. And I will say, if you don't like or can have bigger ideas for what you want to do with the pockets, this is actually something, even as a beginner, you can change super easily, because all it is a flat layer with bias around the edge. So if you wanted to make them bigger or smaller or put another one on top, you could do that very easily. So now it's pinned round. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to top stitch this down to the pocket, down to the front to create a pocket. So I'm going to do that by sewing right around the outer edge of the bias all the way around, starting here, going round and ending here. Okay, so I've moved the needle over in the other direction, and now I'm going to sew. You might want to slow down as you get towards the corner. You want to get a neat thing at the end. Back stitch. There we go. Okay, so the pocket is sewn on and then repeated it, so I have two fronts. So the next thing we're going to do is sew the shoulder seams. Now, there are actually a few different ways of sewing the shoulder seams depending on the kind of finish that you want on the inside. And I'm actually going to show you the two most common ways of doing it. So we need to get the back piece, which is cut out here, and then we're going to pin the fronts at the shoulders here and here. Now, when you're working with quilted fabric, it depends a lot on how thick it is as to how it's going to behave when you press it and you sew a seam. So the easiest way, and I'm going to show you one side doing this, is just totally normal. So we would pin these shoulders together, sew across, finish the seam allowance, and press towards the back. So that can work. And this is a relatively thin pre-quilted fabric, and it will probably work fine. One thing to always bear in mind is that the inside of this is not, there's no lining. So whatever seam allowance you do here is going to be kind of against your body and be visible. So I'll show you that on that side. However, sometimes quilted fabric really doesn't want to fold to one side. So it's basically too bulky. And in that case, it's better to press the seam allowances apart. Now, if you do that, you actually want to finish them first, because pressing them apart and then trying to finish like a tiny seam allowance separately after this is already sewn is actually really tricky. So in this case, you want to finish these shoulder seams first. And I will tell you, what I'm showing you here could work for all the internal seams on this. So it can also work for the side seam, and it can actually also work for the sleeve seam. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can finish these shoulder seams. I am just going to do a simple serging. However, if you don't have a serger, there's another great option, which is to bind these shoulders again. And if you bind them, this, I will say, actually will give you the most kind of upscale, kind of like luxurious look of your jacket. So I highly recommend it if you want to add that extra touch, and it's particularly good if your fabric's a little bit thick. In that case, what you're basically going to do is just bind the edge before you sew it. And to bind it, you're going to do exactly the same as we did for the pockets. So you would simply open up one side. It doesn't actually matter because everything's inside. It doesn't matter what side you do it on. you would pin it here, sew it along there, and then fold it all the way over and top stitch so that it's enclosed. And then when the seams are pressed apart, that's what they would look like on the inside. And then what you can do is top stitch it down, because otherwise these seam allowances are just going to pop back up inside your jacket. So I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to do it by doing serging, but I am going to show you both approaches. So I'm going to start by pinning the shoulder. And I'm going to sew across here, and then I'm also going to finish these seam allowances, and then I'm going to sew across this side. Okay, so I'm just going to sew the regular shoulder, add a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, and now I have my pre-serged pieces on the other shoulder. I'm going to do this side. Okay, so I've sewn both those shoulders in slightly different ways. So this is the kind of main way to do it. So it's sewn and then I have finished the seam allowances together. You can do that with a serger, you could bind it in one go, or you could do a zigzag and trim. The only thing about zigzag and trim is I'd say because of the nature of quilted fabric, it's a little bit more likely to fray. So I'd probably not do that. So if you don't have a serger, I would recommend binding that seam. So I'm going to just push it towards the back. And press. And then as we do the binding, it will actually help keep it in that direction because we will be sewing over the ends and keeping it in that way. So that's the one side. Now on the other side, here is the one where I pre-finished the edges and I'm going to press them apart like this. And it can help to keep your fingers on while it cools off to keep the fabric going in the opposite directions. If you have a clapper, which is a piece of wood that sewists use to keep things flat, you can put a clapper on top of it. And it's actually a really good tool to have in your sewing toolbox. Okay, so again, with this one, when the binding is done, it will keep those pieces apart. But if you want, you could also top stitch. So what you would do is you would basically want to top stitch either side along the edge of the seam allowance, here and here. So that's another option. It's really a sort of style thing. Ultimately, you don't have to do it, but if you have a really spongy fabric that is pushing back, that can be a nice thing to do. Okay, so now that we have done the shoulder seams, we can do exactly the same thing with the side seams. So I'm going to bring these side seams together, pull them around and just pin down. So exactly the same as the shoulder seams. So you can sew them together, finish them together and press them towards the back, or you can pre-finish the edges, sew them together and press them apart. Again, just up to you. In this case, I am just going to sew them the regular way. So I'm going to sew them, finish the seam allowances together and press them towards the back. So I'm going to sew along there and then repeat the same on the other side. Okay, so now the side seams are sewn as well. So now I'm just going to press them back. So your ham is very useful here because there is a bit of a curve and it helps you not have to smoosh it totally flat. So I'm just going to press the seam allowance towards the back. And go along the side. So again, based on the thickness of your quilted fabric, here in particular is pretty thick because it's also got the dart. So if you find that it won't lay flat, this is another area where you could just top stitch. So you would just top stitch on the back side of the side seam. So let me just show you. So here's the side seam. You would sew just on this side, a line down, and it would secure the seam allowance down. In this case, I don't need to do it, but if you are using a thicker fabric and it's bouncing back the whole time, then that's a good idea. Okay, so I'm just going to do the other side. You also need to be careful if there's any batting exposed, because batting will sometimes, depending on the fabric you're using, melt. So you don't want batting melting either in your jacket, because that would be bad, or onto your iron. So it's always a good idea to practice pressing on some scraps first. And if you're ever not sure about something, if it might melt, then always use a press cloth because you don't want to risk that happening. Okay, so you now have a nifty vest. Looking good. You can now try it on. Look very proud of yourself that your lovely little coat is coming along. The next step we're going to do is sewing the sleeves. Here is a sleeve piece. So first thing we're going to do is simply fold it in half this way so that the two long edges match. Pin and sew. And once again, same principle as the shoulders and the side seams. You can finish the seam allowances together and press them to one side, or you can finish the seam allowances first and press them open. Whatever has been working for you is in the other steps is likely to work for you on this one. So I'm now going to sew this and I'm going to finish it. So this seam is sewn, I finished the edges, and now we're going to go on to pressing. So as always, the first thing we do is just press flat. Now, pressing a sleeve when you've got a tube here is a little bit tricky. So especially if you're a beginner, you might not have done this before, and you're going to face the same thing with things like trouser legs. So in an ideal world, you would have what is known as a sleeve board, which is this. But I realize that the vast majority of people are not going to have this. If you do have one, you place the sleeve board down and then you thread whatever your tube is on. And then as you can see, it makes it really easy just to press that seam without pressing the rest of it. However, I realize that most people won't have that. So this is when we recommend a rolled up towel that you might have read about. So here is just a regular bath towel. So what you do, depending on what you're pressing, is you literally just roll it up into a tube. Now you can do the same thing, you can make a ham out of it by just doing this. So when we say press over a tailor's ham or a rolled up towel, this is what we mean, because you've kind of created your own curve. What's actually nice is you can create any curve that you want with a towel, right? Okay, so in this case, we're going to create, they call it a sleeve roll. And we are going to put it in and basically pull the sleeve over the towel. Okay, there you go. So what you can see is it's going to enable us to just press this without pressing the whole rest of the sleeve. So I'm going to do that now. As before, if your seam allowance doesn't want to go to the side, you can also top stitch. Okay, bye-bye towel. Okay, so now we have a sleeve. This is the wrong side, this is the right side. So I'm going to turn it right sides out. Into our nice sleeve. So the next thing we're going to do is finish the bottom here. And we are going to use a very similar technique that we've just been doing for the visible binding, But the difference is that it's a circle, which means that we have to finish the ends in a different way. So you're going to be learning how to do that. So first of all, you cut your piece of bias tape. I'm going to open it up. And then what you want to do is you need to leave both ends free by a couple of inches. And I recommend, and that's where the seam's going to be, it needs to be not exactly at this seam. That helps because otherwise it gets a bit bulky. So you want it kind of around here. So I'm going to open up one side. And I'm going to put my thumb where I want to start sewing. So I'm going to start sewing here. And then I'm leaving a couple of inches here on purpose. So I'm going to pin that there. Now I am going to continue around. Now, when you go over the seam allowance here, make sure it's pushed in the correct direction. I will say I'm terrible at forgetting to do that, but it really helps because otherwise your seam allowance will end up twisted and it will cause funny bumps in your clothes from the outside, which you don't want. So I'm continuing to pin this all the way around. Now, I want to leave a gap here. What I do, because it's very easy to kind of forget where the gap is I put 2 pins at the beginning and end of the gap to help me remember, don't sew past those. That's my little sign to myself. So I've got the 2 free bits here. They're not that even, but you know what? It's going to be fine. As long as they can meet up easily here, that's basically what we're looking for, that they can do that. So even though it's not even, it actually doesn't matter. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew around. I'm going to start at one of the double needles, go all the way around and to the other double needle. Okay, so we have our bias. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine. So sewing around a circle can be a little bit tricky. Now, in some cases, you may have what's called a free arm on your machine, which is this comes off and you're able to put circular things around here. In this case, this is ever so slightly too small to go over here, so I can't do that. But if you have this on your machine and it's small enough, that's a great way to do it because you just put the sleeve on and then you just sew around. In my case, I can't do that. So what I just need to make sure is that I'm not sewing through the other side. So I'm going to place my sleeve under here. So I'm going to take the double pins out. Okay. And then, yeah, just make sure the other side isn't caught. Okay. So you can do it on small chunks and each time check underneath. Take a pin out, check underneath, pin out. You have to keep on turning it, check underneath, we're fine here. And just keep on going round. Until I hit the other set of double pins. I'm going to backstitch there. Okay, so I'm just going to trim the threads. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is make this into a continuous loop. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to bring the bias tape into the gap as if we were sewing it and find out where they meet. Okay, so I'm pinching them here and that's where they meet. Now, there's a couple of things you can do here. You can put a pin through the two like this and then check like, okay, is that flat where the pin is? And it pretty much is. You can also mark with a chalk liner on both sides. Okay, so now what we want to do is sew across here. And you see this side is still folded up, this side is out. That's what you want. So when you can pull it slightly away from the fabric. So I'm going to do that because you just want to sew across the bias tape and not on the sleeve fabric. So I'm just pushing the sleeve fabric out of the way. You've got to make sure, hold on, my layers have gotten funny here. So that side there, flat, that side there's flat. I'm going to take the pin out. You just want to make sure that the layers are all flat, which is what I'm doing here. Okay, so we've done that. Now we're going to do a little bit of trimming and pressing. So I've sewn across there. So what we need to do now is trim the ends off here. So we want to leave a seam allowance that we can press apart. So I'm just going to cut across the two ends, roughly 1/2 inch from the seam. And now I need my ham, or I need my rolled up towel again. And so what we're going to do now, you can see here's where the seam finished and ended. We just want to press the seam allowances apart here. So I'm just going to pop it over the edge of my ham and press them apart. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the machine and I am just going to sew right across and close that gap up. Okay, so now I'm going to close up the hole here. So I'm just going to, again, make sure I'm not going through different layers. Overlap a little bit with the previous stitching. Over those seam allowances. And back. There we go. Okay, so we've now done the first round of stitching for our visible bias. So what we now need to do is the folding, folding, folding. So we're going to flip the bias over like this, all the way around. And now we're going to flip it to the inside. So different people have different approaches to this, whether you do it from the right side or the wrong side. So I am just going to flip it over there, and what you want to do is you want to enclose the stitching line on the inside. Now, if, like me, you are finding that it is fraying a lot, you can trim this edge down a little bit first. So I'm just trimming the edge to stop the fraying, because I don't want little fraying pieces sticking out of my bias. So I'm just cutting through the quilted fabric itself. I'm not cutting through the bias tape. And you can always do this when you're making a quilted jacket. So if you're having a lot of fraying issues, you can just trim it down. You only want to do it a little bit. You don't want to lose too much of this edge, but there is no harm in doing that. Okay. Okay, so flipping it over away from the edge, but it's keeping folded over. This long edge is folded over. So here is a folded edge. And then you flip it over again to cover the stitching line. And you're going to do that all the way around. So we're going to be sewing it from the right side. So I prefer to do this folding from the right side too. But if you want, you can fold from the wrong side. Now, I'm going to show you, this is actually a really good one for using Wonder Tape. So if you'd rather, and it arguably is a little bit easier, I brought it over to the wrong side, and then I'm just folding it over to meet the stitch line. So I'm going to fold it over and press it first. And you're trying, again, where possible, to only press through one side, which is a bit tricky when you have a sleeve. Just put it out there. And I actually find it's easier if it's all flipped the right way before you start doing it. As you can see, you can go backwards and forwards a little bit. So again, making sure that it's over the stitching line on the inside. The nice thing is, no one's going to see the inside. So you want it to be roughly correct, but there we go. Now, the sense check you want to do is make sure it's even on the outside. So the side that's going to show is the bias tape looking even. It actually doesn't matter so much what it looks like on the inside because people aren't going to see it. And so I'm checking and it's looking pretty good. Now, if you were going to use pins, then I recommend switching it around to the right side and putting the pins on first. But this is actually a really nice situation, again, to use Wonder Tape. So I am going to pull off a section, and I tend to do it section by section because it's a little bit fiddly. So I've taken the tape off, and I am just going to put it along. There are different ways you can do this. Maybe I don't do it the best way, I don't know. But I'm going to put it along the seam allowance there, and then fold the bias over, just press it down. And now it is secure there enough that it is not going to wobble. I'm going to go around the other side and do the same thing. So another way to do it is, it comes off the roll with paper on one side and stickiness on the other. So you can actually do it pressing down with the paper. This is probably the way you're meant to do it, to be fair. I'm just lazy. And so then you snap it off and then you peel the other side of paper off, then press it, and then press it down with your fingers. And then I often actually give it another little press as well, which seems to help it stay in place. So the nice thing is that now you can flip your sleeve to the other side and it should stay in place, unlike with pins, which will be a bit tricky then. Okay, so now we can also have another look. Does this bias look even? Now, as a beginner, I will say, although this coat overall is fairly easy to put together, the evenness of your bias is what is going to kind of make it either look more that you are a beginner and just made it, or a little bit more professional. So it's worth playing around with this and moving it around until you're confident that this edge looks really nice and even. So for the sake of this sew along, I'm not going to spend too long doing that, but it's pretty good. So now I'm going to go and top stitch. Again, the same thing we did before. We're just going to go in from this seam and we're going to secure it all the way around, making sure that we've secured down the tape on the inside as well. Okay, so we're going to top stitch. So again, pull the under layer a little bit away. And actually, you know what? I'm going to start near the sides, the seam here, because that's going to be underneath your arm. So if it's a little bit wobbly at the very start, less likely to see it when you're wearing it. So I've lined up the seam with the middle of my presser foot, and then because I have a machine that does this, I'm putting the needle over to the side. And then just keep on turning it as before. There we go. So now I have two sleeves. They've had the ends bound and they are ready to be put into the jacket. So I would say that this is probably the trickiest step if you are a total beginner, but it's a really core sewing skill, and it's called setting in sleeves in the round. So we're going to start with this sleeve here. So one of the things to note about the sleeve is that there are different notches, and it's really important that you have them marked and you know where they are. So there's this notch at the top, which is going to correlate with the shoulder seam. And then there is a single notch on one side, and I've marked it on the other side, probably a little hard to see that side. And then there's a double notch on the other side. So the single notch one goes towards the front of the jacket, and the double notch goes towards the back of the jacket. This is really important because these sleeves are not symmetrical. So if you put them in incorrectly, the wrong way round, the jacket won't fit you properly. So making sure that the single notch is facing the front and the double notch is facing the back is really important. Now, the other thing is that sometimes this length here is a little bit longer than the length of the armhole that it's going into. So let me bring this over here. So the sleeve is going into an armhole. So this circle and this circle are going together. But this is sometimes a little bit longer, especially at the top, than here. So what we need to do is we add some basting stitches to the top of this sleeve now, which help us to then gather the fabric in a little bit to create a curve so that it will fit in the jacket, in the armhole. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some basting stitches in. We are going to start at the 1 notch, go all the way around and end at the double notch. We're going to do 2 lines of stitching, and we're going to do as long a stitch length as you have. So in this case, I think I have 5 millimeters, and you're going to leave long threads at the end. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so I'm just going to keep the sleeve right side out. I'm making sure that I have long sleeve threads. And you want to do the 2 lines inside the 1/2 inch seam allowance, okay? So you don't want it to show, you want it to be inside the seam allowance. So I'm gonna start by doing the first one. My needle's over to the side. You can really do it wherever you want, and I'm lining up with the edge of the fabric, and I know that that's less than 1/2 inch. You don't want to backstitch at either end. Okay, and then I made my own mistake. I didn't put it up to the long enough stitch length, so I've just done that now. And I'm going to go down to the double notch. Then I'm not back stitching. I'm pulling the needle up using the hand wheel, and then I'm pulling it off the machine, and I'm clipping it a few inches out. So we don't usually do that, but in this case we are. So we have long threads either side. Now I'm going to repeat that and do a second line. So the trick is you need to keep these thread tails out of the way. And I'm just going to do another one parallel to that first one. Okay, there we go. I'm going to keep the thread tails out of the way again. Okay, same thing, needle up, pull it off the machine, and long thread tails. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to pin this into the armhole, which I actually think is probably the most tricky step and a bit confusing when you're a beginner, but I've got you. So the first thing we need to do is work out which armhole is this going in, which I haven't actually pre-decided, so you're going to figure it out with me. So we're going to lay the jacket out. And as I mentioned, the clue is the notches. So I am just going to keep it right sides out and be like, this is what it's going to look like, right, as a final jacket. So now we're going to check, is this the right armhole or is it the other one? So what we need is the bottom, the seam in the sleeve would match the side seam here. So I'm like, okay, so it would be like this. And what I want to see is, are the notches matching up? So here on the front, I've got 1 notch. So what do I have here? 2 notches. So this is the wrong side, okay? This sleeve is meant for this side. So let's go over to the other side. Again, I'm going to place it as if I was wearing it. Match the bottom seams up, pull it up. Okay, I've got 1 notch here and I've got 1 notch here. So this is the right way to do it. Now, keep this sleeve the right way out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the jacket, and I am going to pull the sleeve into the jacket. Again, it's like you're wearing it, okay? And I'm going to just pull the sleeve through the arm side, okay? And now we've got the right one on the right side. It's a matter of pinning them to match everything up. But the good news is we've got lots of anchor points. So I'm going to start first by pinning the side seam of the jacket to the side seam of the sleeve. Now you want to make sure, let me just check, that your seam allowances are still pressed in the right direction as you do this. So I want to make sure that my side seam allowance is still going that way as I pin it through these levels. and you're pinning, so the pins are on the inside of the coat. Okay? This is confusing because it feels intuitively like you're not doing it right sides together, but you actually are because these right sides are together. But I always think in my brain, I'm like, oh, it feels wrong. So I've done that one first. Now I'm just going to pin up to the first notch, the first single notch on this one side. So I'm going to match the notch on the sleeve and the jacket and just put one pin there. And then this piece, it's very even. So I'm just going to put the two, and what I mean by that is that the jacket arm side and the sleeve are the same length. So that's very easy. Now I'm going to do the same on the other side. Move the threads of the basting away. I'm going to match up the double notch on the sleeve and on the body of the jacket. I'm going to pin there. And now I'm going to pin this section. Okay, so the underarm is now secure. Now I'm going to line up the top notch with the shoulder seam and make sure that the shoulder seam is still pressed the right way. So we want it pressed towards the back, which is that way. Now when you do this one, ideally don't pin through the basting stitches because we might still change those. We might adjust those. So I'm just going to kind of go above and below them. There we go. But it's secure now. So now we need to do this part with this part. Now this is where you might see it looks a bit tricky because this line is shorter than this line. So what are we going to do about it? Well, that is what the basting stitches are for. Now, so we have a firm point here. We know that that point needs to be, they need to meet. And we have a firm point here. We know that this point needs to meet. So what we need to do is we need to reduce the length of this longer piece to match this shorter piece. And using the basting is how we do it. So you want to pull the threads, ideally, on the side that was the bobbin thread when you were sewing it. So we sewed it with this side up, which means that it's the right side of the fabric that has the bobbin thread. So I'm going to find the basting stitches, and I'm going to hold them, and I am going to push the fabric along the threads, okay? So as I do it, I'm kind of cinching it up. I'm gathering it up. And what you're after is lots of very, very small little gathers. And as you do that, it's making this side smaller and smaller. And now, look, if I line these two pieces up, they almost exactly match. Now, you can do one thread and then the other thread. That's the purpose of having two, or you can do them at the same time. It depends a little bit on how much you're gathering. But this is a principle that's used like lots and lots and lots in sewing, so it's a great one to know. You just want the gathering to be as even as possible. And believe it or not, when this is sewn, you won't see any of these little bumps. They will actually disappear. So I'm now going to pin this now that I have these little gathers. So we're pinning from the inside of the jacket. And if you find that your gathering stitches are slipping, you can actually wind them around this pin, the last pin, to just anchor them. The basting stitches should end up inside the seam allowance of your coat, so you don't actually even have to remove them, but if they end up showing, you may want to do that. So now I'm going to repeat it on the back here. So we have the same thing. The sleeve here is longer than the armhole here. So I'm going to get the threads from the bobbin side, which is the right side in this case. And I am just going to hold them tight. And basically, people say pull the thread, but for me, it's actually kind of the opposite. I hold the thread and then I slide the fabric along the thread. It's a bit semantics, I guess, which one you're doing. And then, yeah, and then make sure that they're even. So it's quite easy for it not to be even. That's why I keep on saying make sure it's even. You have to kind of like play around with the fabric a little bit. until it's even. And what you can end up doing, what I've done is I've made it too tight because now this is shorter than this. So I'm going to loosen it out a little bit. And there we go, matches. So now I'm going to continue to put the needle pins in. Let's call them needles, pins. Put the pins in. Okay, so now we have this sleeve pinned in to the arm side really nicely. So what we're going to do now is we are going to sew it in. Okay, so now we're going to sew this in. Now, if you have a machine like mine, this is a great time to take this piece out. This is called the free arm, and then you can just put the sleeve basically around this arm, and you can sew it very nicely like that. But many of you aren't going to have a machine with a free arm, so let me show you how you do it. So what you can actually do is, without turning this the other way, you can sew on this side. And by doing that, it's actually much easier to control what's happening because there's only one layer of fabric. You could theoretically do this with the sleeve, but the sleeve's a much smaller circle. It makes it a bit harder. And the first thing I'm going to do is use a long stitch to baste it in. The reason is because sometimes you get like puckers or you get little folds in the fabric. It's very easy when you're inserting a sleeve. And so by doing this, we're going to baste it in, check if it's working, and then if it is, we sew over it, and if it isn't, we can try again. So there's lots and lots and lots of pins, so it's a little slow going when you do this. You have to turn the whole thing, keep on turning the whole thing over. Keep rotating. And then I'm reaching the point with the basting. So if you did the basting at less than ½ inch, you should be sewing on the other side of it. But even if you didn't, don't worry, you can take it out later. I appear to have lost some pins here. Oh, there's one. Okay. Okay, so I basted it in. So now I'm going to check. So I'm just going to turn it outside and I'm going to look at this seam. So are there any folds of fabric? That's the main thing you're looking for. And I am not seeing any. Okay, so looks like I did it okay. If I did see a fold, and what I mean is you get these tucks, so it would look like that. If there's that, you want to undo the basting and try again. So I'm going to turn it back around the way I had, and now I'm going to sew it again, but at a 2.5 length stitch, because that's much stronger. If you just keep it at this basted 4 stitch, it's not going to be a strong enough seam and it might burst, which is the last thing you want. So I'm going to trim some of those threads off. So now I'm just going to go around again. And this time it's easier because I don't have to take any pins out. And if any of your basting went a bit wobbly, as maybe you saw mine did, doesn't matter because we're doing it again now. No, hold Okay, I made a mistake there, so I'm gonna show you what I'm gonna do. So, can you see that I accidentally just started coming off the seam allowance? So I'm gonna go back a few inches, go down, do a back stitch, and carry on. So the nice thing about sewing is you can almost always redo most things, with the exception of cutting. So that's why cutting is so important. And then you're seeing lots of stitches as we're going around because you can see the sleeve cap stitching, you can see the initial rough basting, but don't let that concern you. Just make sure that this is going in at your 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so let's check from the outside again. Yeah, and on the outside, it looks pretty good. If any of the basting is showing, just use a seam ripper and rip it out now. So the next thing I'm just gonna do is finish that seam allowance. Okay, so both sleeves are in now. They are sewn in, and then the edges have been serged. And as you can see what I was saying before, it kind of secures the seam allowance of the shoulder open as well. Now you want to press these. Now, the interesting thing is normally if you were making just like a button down shirt, you press the seam allowances towards the sleeve. And what that means is they fold in and go that way. But with padded jackets, the seam allowance just doesn't want to do that. It's too thick and it's very hard to get it to press in like that. So really, I just press it the way that it wants to go, which in this case is in this direction. So again, a great time for your ham or for your rolled up towel, if that's what you have. And then just press the seam allowance. There's actually special kinds of hams that are just for sleeves and for sleeve heads like this, but you can do it with a humble ham. Okay, so that is now pressed. So, oh, sorry. And then you can also press it again from the outside. It's kind of up to you, to be honest, on this one, how kind of spongy and how much the fabric pushes back. If you weren't making a quilted jacket, you would definitely press it from the outside. But in this case, I actually kind of want to keep a bit of the bounce, so I'm not going to do that. So if you were going to add the tie to the front, which you can do on either view, so even though it's in view B, you can do it on view A, you want to remark the tie marking now. So it's this notch here, and you want to mark it actually like quite a bit, quite a long marking. And the reason for that is that you were going to be binding it, and we want to not lose the marking. You can always come back and mark it again, let's face it, but that's where we are right now. Okay, so now we are going to do the mega binding. Now, the good news for you is that you already know all the techniques, because between the pockets and between the sleeves, you have learned how to do this. So we're basically sewing a huge loop. So what I mean by that is we're starting at one point. So we're going to start at the center back. And we just do that because the join is often like the messiest bit of binding. So you want to put it in the least visible place. We're going to go all the way up this side, around the corner, all the way around the neckline, down here, all the way around here, all the way around here to here. So it's going to take a long time, but it actually isn't really particularly complicated. And I am going to show you a technique that I think is actually slightly easier than pinning it all in advance. So traditionally what you would do, so we're going to start at the center back. So I'm going to turn it over and we start on the right hand side, on the right side, sorry, not right hand side. We are going to treat it as if we were doing a circle because it meets up at the end. So it effectively is a really big circle. So what that means is when we unfold it, we're going to leave a bit at the end. So I'm just going to pin the starting point here. Now, traditionally, and indeed in the instructions, I tell you to now pin the whole thing. It's actually in many ways better not to. The reason is this is such a long seam that if your pinning is ever so slightly off, what starts happening as you go around is you end up with like bumps in your bias tape, which you don't want. It's actually easier to apply it as you sew. So I am going to show you how to do that. If you would rather do the traditional one of pinning it all the way around, you can, but let me demonstrate to you how you can do it this way. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do this technique. So I just have all of the bias tape here. In an ideal world, it would all be like, spooled up beautifully. But you know what? It's fine if it's in a tangle on your lap as long as, well, not really a tangle, but as long as it's free and you can get to it, just keep it on your lap. I'm going to start at the center back where my 2 pins are because I need to leave this end for the joining. And basically, I'm just going to begin by doing the back stitching. I am just going to place it with my hands section by section. So maybe, I don't know what that is, 6 inches. So I'm going to go 6 inches down, and this is a straight line, so it's actually very, very easy. So I'm going to hold it firm here and hold it with my other finger. And can you see how much faster this is going to be because I'm not taking any pins out? So I'm going to make sure that this seam allowance is folded the right way. I'm going to lay out the next 6 inches. Holding it here, holding it here. And I'm just going to keep on doing it section by section along this flat bit. Okay, now we're coming up for a corner. So I'm going to get close to the corner and I'm going to bend it round with my fingers. Now, if you want at this point, you can add some pins to help you. You can also snip into the bias. So we're doing it at the machine. Bend pin. There we go. But I'm just pinning this section, not the whole thing. Pin. So you don't have to pin. If you feel confident to do it without pinning, you can do that. But you can do that for a little bit of extra help. Okay, now we're on to going up the front. So I'm going to, again, just pull it out 6 inches or so. And I'm going to continue to do this all the way around the front. Okay, so I've sewn all the way around and there's a gap. So we're going to do the same as we did on the sleeve. And we're going to bring the 2 pieces of bias across to where they would meet, which would be here. There we go. I'm going to pin across. Okay. Pull this over to the machine, make sure that it's still, the layers are all flat as they're meant to be. It's a little bit tricky, but you can do it. Okay. So, trim the threads. It's a little bit bulky when you have an entire jacket. Okay, Then I'm just going to do the same thing as I did with the sleeve. So I'm going to trim these down to about 1/2 inch. And then I'm actually not going to press, I'm going to be naughty here, but you're going to press. So press these apart, and then we're going to sew the gap. And I'm just going to go straight ahead and sew the gap. Okay, so a little bit hard to see, but we now have the first line of bias tape around the entire edge. So now we are going to do exactly the same as we did with the sleeve. So we're going to fold it over and press, and then fold it over to the inside again, press, and then top stitch all the way around. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to start doing the pressing. So I'm going to turn it to the side. And this is, again, you know, you can use Wonder tape, you can use pins, really doesn't matter. So I'm flipping the bias tape over once, and then I'm flipping it over again to meet the stitching line. Okay, so depending on what method you want to use, you can pin it. So you want to check, does it look even on the right side? Oops, drop my pins. Okay, and then when you pin it from the right side, because you're going to be sewing it from the right side. Okay, so just do that the whole way around. When you get to the corners, it's the same approach as when we did the pockets. You just want to like carefully mold around the corner to get an even look on the outside. And then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to top stitch it all the way around. So now I'm going to go around and do that second round. And there we have it. You have now a finished View A jacket. We have the binding all the way around. It's all nicely finished. So the only final thing is if you want to add the tie, which is in View B, but you can add it to View A as well. So let me just quickly show you how you do that. So I have one tie that's already finished here, and I'm going to make the second tie. So what you do for that is you cut a piece of binding. Now this can really be as long as you want. I'd recommend at least 12 inches, but if you want like a longer bow down the front of your jacket, you can certainly do that. So a piece of your binding, and then at the end, you want to open it all the way up and then fold the whole end to the wrong side by a little bit. I mean, it doesn't matter exactly how much it is. I'd say roughly 1/4 inch. There we go. And now you're going to refold the bias tape as it was. And I'm going to fold it all the way up to being closed. And I'm going to press again. And now I'm going to pin through the end. So you can like fuss around with the end a little bit to try and make it like as precisely enclosed as possible. So there we go. And now I'm going to do the same on the other end. So I'm going to open it up. I'm going to fold it in by about 1/4 inch. And press. Now I'm going to refold. There we go. And I'm going to fold the whole bias tape in half. I'm just going to flip it over because I'm right-handed. There we go. So now I'm just going to, okay, hold on, let me just pin the other end as well, keep it there. So now I'm just going to fold the whole rest of it in half. And so what we've created is this fully enclosed bias tie. So it's fully enclosed. So what we just need to do now is sew the open 3 sides shut. So it actually is a little bit easier to start in the middle and go out, but it depends a little bit on your sewing machine. But basically we're going to sew up one short end all along the open end and down the other end. So let's go and do that. Okay, so because it's quite hard to start at a small edge, I'm actually starting halfway down and then I'm going to flip it and do it again. So you just want to sew just in the edge. Get to the corner. You're going to stop with your needle down, lift the presser foot up, turn it round, down, and then towards the end you can use the hand wheel to get yourself a little bit more accuracy as you do your back stitching. So I'm going to just do this. Now, it's actually fine if you only sew one of the short ends. So if you're doing that, you can just start at the long end, go down and do the short end. But I'm going to just sew both of them to be a little bit neater. So I'm trimming the threads, I flipped it over, and now I'm going to go in the other direction, starting in the middle. Okay, so now I have another tie. Okay, so now I'm going to look for my tie marking, which is here, and I'm going to place. Now, if you didn't sew this end, then you want the raw end over here, and you want the side where the stitching is to be facing down. And basically just place it on the binding at the height of the notch. Now, you may or may not even be able to put a pin through here, and I'm going to try, but it doesn't always work because it's pretty thick. Oh, yeah, no, that's okay. So the edge will be aligned with the binding, and then the rest of it's going off the front so that it looks like this from the front. And now we're going to sew it on in two places. We're going to sew on top of this original stitching here, and then we're going to sew another little line here. Now again, I'm using black thread so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. You would use a coordinated thread so that even if it isn't perfect, you wouldn't see it. Okay, so just backwards and forwards there. Cut on the back. And then a second line just here. And there you go. And then simply repeat the same thing on the other side. So congratulations, you made a quilted jacket. And if you're a beginner sewer, that is a huge achievement. I hope you're very excited by the possibilities. So where do you go from here? Well, first of all, get creative. So there are so many opportunities. If you're a quilter, there are so many things you can do. You can design quilts and like make a patchworked fabric first to cut out of. You could do applique. Some people even find old quilts and take them apart and make them into jackets. It's been a huge trend, and there are so many things you can do once you have a sewing pattern that fits you. You can make different length versions. So one thing that's quite cool are like long duster length quilted coats. And many people will also often then leave off the sleeves and then just bind the edges. So it's a simple design, but there's lots and lots of different ways that you can use it. Now you can do this. You actually now have the basics of sewing a lot of shirts and jackets. So you might not think you do, but actually the basics of the front and the back and the sleeves, that's how these things go together. So you might even want to consider taking one more step up and maybe making your first button-up shirt. So for instance, the Cashmerette Vernon shirt is actually a really good first shirt to make, and you will use a lot of the techniques you used here, but also start learning some more. Now, if you want to learn more about how to fit, I've got you covered. My first book, Ahead of the Curve, has many simple tutorials to help you perfect your fit. I know that fitting can seem very confusing and overwhelming, but I have taken a really straightforward approach and I show you on people who look exactly like you. There are tons and tons of color photos of before and after, what it looks like if you have a fit issue and how it's fixed. And on top of that, there are also 5 full-size patterns, which is not only great value, but also a great next step for you. If you've just been working through sewing the curves patterns, Ahead of the Curves patterns are totally at the right level for you too. So I highly recommend checking it out as the next step in your sewing journey. You can find it at cashmerette.com/ahead of the curve. If you want even more sewing, I highly recommend you join Cashmerette Club. Cashmerette Club is an amazing community of over 4,500 sewists from all around the world. We get together and we do some amazing sewing. Every month you get a brand new free Cashmerette pattern in sizes 0 to 32 and cup sizes C to H, a full sew along and a whole community of people there to help you and cheer you on. There is an in-depth masterclass from me about fitting every month. There's a live event, there's a forum, there are special offers and more. You can join on a monthly basis or you can get the maximum benefit by joining our all access level, which includes several bonuses, including free Cashmerette patterns. To learn more, go to cashmerette.com/club. And then finally, if you want to stay in touch with everything about Cashmerette and learning to sew, sign up for our newsletter. Go to cashmerette.com/learn to sew newsletter. We'll send you exclusive offers along with tips and tricks to help you as someone starting out in the super exciting journey of learning to sew your own clothes.